All right, today we're going to finish up part two of the agricultural section by taking a look at agribusiness. Now remember, agribusiness is any large scale business that deals with agriculture, so it's pretty straightforward. We generally look at this through what's referred to originally as commercial agriculture, and remember, this can be traced back to the colonial empires when we look at North America and South America as providing sources of raw materials for their European counterparts. Now, in a lot of cases, businesses today will focus on what's called a monoculture, which means literally they have either just a single crop or a single form of livestock. So in other words, they don't diversify whatever it is that they grow. In other words, if they're growing sugarcane, that's all they're growing. If they're growing grapes, that's all they grow. So remember, monoculture means a single crop or single type of livestock. Now, one of the things that helps to determine what's going on is, again, climate, which is critical when we're looking particularly at agriculture. Very similar to our biomes, and I'm not going to really spend too much time on this. I just want you to know that there's a classification system that's kind of an international one. It's called the Köppen climate system, and it's based on temperature and precipitation. Again, a lot of this is going to seem really similar to, again, our biomes. You have A climates, which are warm and humid, and they can make up equatorial rainforests, monsoon climates, and savannas. You get letter B, our dry climates, which are our deserts and our steppes. We get C climates, which are humid temperate climates where they're moist but not overly cold. One of the groups that falls into this also is the Mediterranean climate, which is kind of the oddball. Remember, it has dry summers. We have D climates are colder. They tend to have mild winter climates with warm summers, which is the DA classification. Cold winter climate with short summers, DFB classification. And then our DFC, which is a long frigid winter with almost no summer whatsoever. And then finally, E are the polar climates. And again, really a lot of these, I doubt it will come up on the exam specifically. Just remember that there's another system other than biomes called the Köppen climate classification system. That's really all you should need to know for that one. Now, keep in mind, again, a lot of the monocultural crops too are also plantation agriculture, even still today. Generally, these have large estates. They are cash crops, which are, again, they're determined by climate. Normally, they have alien workers. In other words, foreigners are actually working the crops in a lot of cases. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean a foreign country. In other words, think of, like, say, Guatemala. Guatemala might have a lot of Filipinos because Spain had actually occupied both areas. So in Guatemala, there may be a lot of Filipinos actually working on harvesting bananas in this case. The other thing is for a lot of these plantations, there's a lot of foreign capital that actually invested in the crops. So for example, even though the country of Guatemala may have people working there for it, the owners are not necessarily Guatemalan. Could be American, could be English, could be Spanish. Again, that's what a reference to a plantation agriculture is referring to, is that the locals don't really control that resource. Now, perfect example of this, speaking of Guatemala, comes from the United Fruit Company. Essentially what happened back in the 1950s, the U.S. was very anti-communist, and the United Fruit Company had bought a lot of land in Guatemala. And what had happened was Guatemala decided to nationalize the land. In other words, they took it from the United Fruit Company and paid the United Fruit Company $3 million. Now, the United Fruit Company had lied on their tax returns, which is where they got the information from. The real value of the property was closer to $300 million. So essentially what happened was the United Fruit Company, which you can see here in the picture, Chiquita Banana is a subsidiary of. Essentially what they did is they went to President Eisenhower and told Eisenhower that communists were taking over the Guatemalan government. As a result of this, Eisenhower authorized the CIA to go in and assassinate 6 of the elected officials, one of them including the president of Guatemala. The CIA then went ahead and placed a friendly regime in power. And again, this became kind of a black eye of why the Latin Americans really have issues and problems when looking at and dealing with the United States. We also have contemporary cash crops. Cotton and rubber are probably two of the biggest ones, but again, these crops are also facing synthetic alternatives. Okay, generally made from oils or plastics. We get other things that will actually substitute for cotton and rubber. Now, keep in mind we have luxury crops. The largest and probably the most important in the world, of course, is tea, which is the dominant beverage of Eurasia. You have cacao, which you can see here is made from chocolate. You have the fruit that it comes from on the far left. Then you have the middle, which are the raw beans, which then the beans are heated and cooked, and then they're ground up and sugars added later to actually make chocolate. Coffee, of course, is another contemporary cash crop, as well as tobacco. Now, Mediterranean crops we need to pick out specifically because, again, remember the Mediterranean has a very different climate. It actually has very dry summers and wet winters, and as a result of that, we get a couple of types of food groups that grow in there that are very specific. The two most important, grapes and olives. Okay, of course, if you guys think of olive oil with the Italians, really easy to remember. But also remember grapes. Lots of wine comes from the Mediterranean area. Again, France, Spain, Italy. Okay. Also, citrus grows in the area as well as figs. This is a picture of people gathering olives from an olive tree. Now, again, the ones with, of course, bigger concern are illegal drugs. Cocaine, which comes from the coca leaf, generally found in Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia, and then heroin comes from the poppy plant, and this is actually a poppy plant, poppy field in Afghanistan. Another country in Southeast Asia that actually grows a lot of poppies that can be made into heroin is Myanmar.